execution is proof of the government's determination to maintain law and order. Let Mr. Echegaray's death serve as a strong warning against the criminal elements.
What's something people don't know about the night the Philippines stood still? The execution of Leo Echegaray wasn't just a legal event, it was a moment that split a nation, ignited fierce debate, and forced everyone to confront what justice really means. February 5th, 1999, a date that would be etched into the collective memory of the Philippines. The Philippines was silent, tense, waiting. The air was thick with anticipation and anxiety. For the first time in 23 years, the state was about to execute a man. Leo Echegaray, the gravity of the moment was palpable. His face was everywhere. Newspapers, TV, whispered conversations. He was the topic on everyone's lips. He became the symbol of a nation divided over justice and mercy. The debate was not just legal, but deeply moral. Some demanded retribution, desperate for order in a country plagued by crime. They saw this as a necessary step. Others, led by the Catholic Church and human rights groups, called the death penalty barbaric. They argued for compassion and the sanctity of life. The debate was fierce, emotional, and deeply personal. Would the president intervene? Would he heed the calls for clemency? Would the Supreme Court halt the execution? Legal minds were racing against the clock. Every moment was electric with uncertainty. The nation was on edge, waiting for any sign of change. News vans crowded outside New Bilibid prison, cameras fixed on the gates. The world was watching. Inside, Echegaray spent his final hours with family and his spiritual advisor. It was a time of reflection and farewells. He was no longer just a convict. He was the focus of a nation's hopes and fears. His fate was intertwined with the country's soul. The legal appeals were over. The finality of the situation was sinking in. The political will to stop the execution had faded. Leaders were silent, their decisions made. The machinery of the state was in motion. The preparations were meticulous, the outcome inevitable. For some, this was justice, a long-awaited resolution to a painful chapter. For others, a moment of national shame, a step backward in the fight for human rights. For Leo Echegaray, it was the end. His journey, marked by controversy and debate, was concluding. The country held its breath, knowing what came next would echo for decades. The implications were vast and far-reaching. The silence was about to be shattered. The nation braced itself for the inevitable. To understand the uproar, we go back to 1994. The Philippines, still recovering from dictatorship, was gripped by fear of rising crime. Echegaray's crime, raping his 10-year-old stepdaughter known as Baby, hit like a bombshell. The details were horrific, the betrayal unimaginable. The story dominated headlines, fueling outrage and fear. Echegaray became the face of evil. Baby, the symbol of innocence betrayed. In a society that treasures family, the crime was unforgivable. The case became a rallying cry for the return of the death penalty. People demanded harsh justice, desperate for safety and order. The demand for Echegaray's execution was a collective cry for a safer world. But beneath the outrage was a deeper anxiety. A society struggling with poverty, violence, and uncertainty. The case offered a simple narrative: villain, victim, punishment. The nation's pain and fear found a target. The call for death became a call for control. Echegaray's case was the first test of a law brought back from the past, a law that would soon divide a nation. The death penalty had been abolished in 1987, a symbol of hope after the Marcos dictatorship. For many, it marked a new era, one where justice was tempered with mercy. But by the early 1990s, violent crime surged. Fear and frustration grew, and many believed only the harshest punishments could restore order. In 1993, President Fidel Ramos signed Republic Act 7659, restoring capital punishment for so-called heinous crimes. The message was clear: the government would be tough on crime. Echegaray's trial moved quickly. The verdict was delivered and he was sentenced to die. For some, it was justice. For others, a system moving too fast. The Supreme Court reviewed the case as the nation watched and waited. Debate raged. Some believed the death penalty would bring justice. Others feared the innocent could be caught in a flawed system. The Catholic Church and human rights groups protested, arguing the system was too imperfect for such an irreversible punishment. Vigils were held, rallies filled the streets, and legal appeals were filed to halt the execution. Echegaray's lawyers fought desperately, winning him a temporary stay and giving hope to opponents. But President Joseph Estrada refused clemency, determined to show resolve. The courts upheld the sentence, and the machinery of the state moved forward. The law, reborn after years of dormancy, was about to claim its first life in a generation. The nation braced for what came next. The countdown had begun, and no one could say what the future would hold. Execution day at New Bilibid prison was surreal. The air was thick with tension, and a heavy silence hung over the sprawling compound as the sun rose behind the prison walls. Guards moved with quiet urgency, their faces set and unreadable. The prison was locked down, a sterile chamber prepared for lethal injection. Every detail was checked and rechecked. The room felt cold, clinical, and utterly devoid of comfort. Echegaray spent his last morning with family and his spiritual advisor, calm but insistent on his innocence. Their final moments together were filled with quiet words, tears, and prayers. At 3 p.m., he was led to the chamber in an orange jumpsuit. The echo of his footsteps in the hallway was the only sound. Witnesses, officials, journalists, the victim's family, watched from behind glass. Their faces were tense, some pale with anxiety. Echegaray was strapped to a gurney, an IV line prepared. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He was given a microphone for his last words, a plea for forgiveness, a claim of being a victim of poor man's justice. His voice was steady, echoing in the chamber. He prayed, then the drugs began to flow. The process was methodical, each step carried out with clinical precision. His eyes closed, his chest rose and fell, then stilled. In that moment, time seemed to stop for everyone in the room. At 3:19 p.m., Leo Echegaray was pronounced dead. The official's voice was flat, almost mechanical. The silence that followed was heavier than before. No one spoke. The weight of what had just occurred pressed down on everyone present. The act was done, clinical, final, irreversible. The chamber, once so tense, now felt empty and hollow. The witnesses left, carrying the weight of what they'd seen. Some walked quickly, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere, while others lingered, lost in thought. Outside, the world waited for news. Reporters jostled for position, and the crowd murmured anxiously. The first execution in decades was complete. The news spread quickly, sparking immediate reactions across the country. The nation exhaled, but the debate was far from over. For many, the execution raised more questions than it answered. News of Echegaray's death exploded across the country. Supporters cheered, believing justice had been served. Opponents mourned, church bells tolling in protest. Human rights advocates called it a stain on the nation's soul. The execution didn't end the debate, it intensified it. Doubts lingered. Was the evidence truly clear? Was justice really done? Echegaray's claim of poor man's justice haunted many. The finality of death left questions forever unanswered. Even the method, lethal injection, came under fire, as witnesses described a less than peaceful end. Activists argued the state had simply masked brutality with medical procedure. The event was dissected, debated, and mourned. The nation was left divided, the wound still raw, the story was far from over. Echegaray was the first but not the last. 6 more executions followed, each sparking protest but less shock. Death row inmates lived in fear, hope replaced by dread. The public's appetite for execution slowly faded. Abolitionists' arguments gained ground. What if the system made a mistake? The promised deterrent effect never clearly materialized. By 2006, the tide had turned. President Arroyo, opposing capital punishment, signed a law abolishing the death penalty. Over 1,200 death sentences were commuted to life. The era that began with Echegaray's execution ended in reversal. The nation had looked into the abyss and stepped back. The lethal injection chamber fell silent. The debate, however, continued. Today, the execution chamber stands empty, a monument to a turbulent era. Leo Echegaray's name has faded from headlines, but not from memory. His story forced a nation to confront its values, justice, mercy, and the power of the state. The journey traced a dramatic arc, from outrage to execution to repeal. The legacy is complexity. No easy heroes, no simple answers. The case exposed the fallibility of justice and the irreversible cost of death. It showed how public anger can drown out reflection. The quest for justice remains messy, human, and fraught with consequence. Decades later, the question lingers. Was justice served, or was a terrible mistake made? The wound and the debate may never fully heal.